Bienvenidos a Tres Respuestas, un espacio de conversación, de opinión y de propuestas. Nos encontramos en el área de Washington, D.C., en los cuarteles generales de Conservación Internacional, una de las organizaciones más importantes para la protección de la naturaleza en nuestro planeta. Y nuestro invitado de hoy es su CEO, un gran amigo, el Dr. Sanjayan. Sanjayan nació en Sri Lanka, también se educó en África, es un biólogo conservacionista, una persona que ha estado en el mundo de la ciencia y desde hace aproximadamente 5 años dirige los destinos de esta organización, donde ha logrado consolidar muchísimas campañas de fondeo para la protección de la naturaleza en el mundo y ha sido también un gran colaborador y amigo de la causa de la conservación en Colombia. Sanjayan, it's such a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you for being with us in Tres Respuestas, and thank you for having us here in your headquarters.
Well, thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure to see you, and thank you for visiting our space here in Washington, D.C.
Well, let me start, as I always do with our special guests. Let's talk about you and your life and your family. I know you were born in Sri Lanka, you lived in West Africa, you then moved to the United States later on in your life. But how would you describe yourself? Who is Sanjayan?
What a great question. I wrestle with it all the time myself. I was born in Sri Lanka, yes, as you said, but when I was 5 years old, my parents left Sri Lanka because there was a civil war that was starting. The troubles were brewing, and there was a 30-year plus civil war in Sri Lanka. We are a minority community, and things were getting dicey, I would say, for my family. And so my parents, really in the middle of the night, 2 suitcases with about a 1-week notice, we went not just to Europe or Australia or someplace like that. We went to Africa. And we went to West Africa, we went to Sierra Leona, but not even the capital city. We went to a small forest and logging town, mining town, 200 miles from the capital city, a little town called Kenema, like right in the middle of the forest. And my earliest memories were living in a house on stilts. It was not on the ground, it was elevated, but surrounded by forest and surrounded really by wildlife. We had monkeys in the trees, colobus monkeys, chimpanzees, forest elephants were in the forest. I mean, it was quite a remarkable place for a child to be suddenly parachuted in, so to speak.
So that's where you were born and raised. So yeah. I believe that's where your passion for nature began.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I always had that even back in Sri Lanka. But Sierra Leone, you couldn't help but be surrounded by nature. That was sort of my happy place. And so I would wander in the forest and my dad worked initially for a logging company, and I remember going in the logging truck one time and watching a gigantic tree. They could only cut one tree down; it was so big. It would come thundering down in the middle of the rainforest, and I would run along the top of along the trunk of the tree, right, to the canopy, to where the canopy is, and then find chameleons and snakes and lizards and baby birds and things like that. And so it was all about collecting things and bringing them home, keeping them for a little while, and then when I wasn't looking or asleep, my mom would put them back into the wild. But my love for nature grew there. Eventually, I was, once I'd finished high school, my parents decided continuing education there would be difficult. They had moved at the time. I think they were now living in Sudan. And so I came to the United States, but with very little understanding of what I wanted to do, or there was no career pathway. Being a conservation biologist or going into the environment was just a hobby. My mother literally said in our language, that is just for white people. And that's how we imagined it, because the only person I knew who did anything like what I wanted to do was David Attenborough, and that was a figure on a VHS videotape that my parents would bring home and show us. So it was always seen as a hobby or something very far away. I never imagined that it would be my passion and also my career.
Many people will ask what it takes to become the CEO of one of the most important global environmental philanthropic organizations in the planet. So you decided to embrace a career as a biologist, as a conservation biologist, and then you saw a career path that drove you to this way. But how does that path look like? I mean, so you went to California, you did your PhD, and what comes next?
Well, like most things, and I bet your career had some of this as well. It's only easy to see these when you look backwards, right? In the moment, I had no idea. I had no desire to be the CEO of anything. What I knew is, so I was lucky. I was lucky in that I always had the luck or the flexibility or the opportunity to put one foot in front of the other and just do something that I liked and keep doing the things that I liked more and more. And that's not a bad idea for most people, to be honest. If you're pretty good at understanding what you're really passionate about, and if you just take one step and keep taking those steps and keep going deep and deep into what you love, the world does sort of sort it out for you at some point. Now, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest about what you're good at and honest about what you're not good at. And so there needs to be some level of honesty. I also had a couple of people who helped me. Like in critical moments, they took a massive bet on me. And even getting this job as CEO, I really thought that as close as I was to being given this job or, getting this job, I thought at the last moment, they will come up with some excuse not to give it to me. And frankly, for me, it was all because of race. In the back of my head, I have a voice that said, they cannot picture you as a CEO because you don't look like any of the other CEOs of conservation organizations, right? And that's not your background. You don't come from that background. So there have been times in my life where people have given me a hand and they've opened a door. I've never been afraid to take it. And I've just always pursued the things that I really loved and just keep doing it at a very high level. And it's led me here, but to be honest, if it had led me somewhere else, I think I could still be impactful and I could still be happy. So this was never, I think people who set off on a goal of being the CEO, of building a company, that's a very hard thing to set off as a goal. I think you're much better off by saying, I want to have an impact, or I want to do something that makes me really happy, or changes the world, or focus your efforts in that way. Do you see what I'm saying?
Of course.
Every kid has at some moment saying this small desire, they want to be president. But to be the president of a country takes so many different paths that even if you're very good at many, many things, just by luck or by chance or by timing, that might not be right for you. Well, but it doesn't mean you're not impactful in whatever you do.
One of my favorite books is Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse.
Yes.
So there are two personalities in the book. There's Govinda, who's a seeker, who's seeking for new opportunities every day. So determined. There's Siddhartha, that is it's more of a founder, an encounterer of moments. And I think the message that the book lives is that in life, sometimes when you're a seeker, many things don't get too much close to you, but when you are also open to be an encounterer and find those opportunities in life, that's where also magic can take place. And I think it happens in multiple ways. But I wanted to ask you something, Sanjayan. There was a very important moment, and that is 2014. I believe that's the moment where you joined CI for the first time. So you come to this organization that was founded decades ago by Peter Seligman, who's a great friend of ours, someone we both admire. And he created this organization from scratch, envisioned this organization to become a center of thought and action to conserve the planet. So you come in 2014. In 2017, Peter says, you know what, I'm going to pass to a new stage. I'm going to be the chairman of the board. You will be the CEO. And you have accomplished in this year's leading CI 2 or 3 or 4 major fundraising efforts for conservation globally. You have been able to raise more than $2.7 billion that have been deployed all over the world. So I want to ask a little bit about that. When you came, what grabbed your love for this organization, and how was also that very important transition? Because one of the things that I also admire is the teamwork that you have with Peter as chairman of the board, and how you've been able to make this organization more global, with more presence in different parts of the world. You've issued blue carbon projects in Colombia. You've done conservation in most of the hot spots in the planet. You have a motivated team. How has that process been for you?
Great. So when I finished with graduate school, I worked for several small environmental organizations, eventually ended up at the World Bank, and worked for them as a consultant for some years. And then I joined the Nature Conservancy and became their lead scientist for the whole organization over many years. And had a very good career there, and very deeply grateful for the opportunities that I was given there. I had known Peter. He was kind of a legend in the space. And if you think about these big conservation groups, WCS, WWF, the Nature Conservancy, others, the founders aren't around anymore. And I always wanted to work with a founder. Mm-hmm. I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley. I kind of knew the founder culture. And I wanted to ask this interesting question, like, look, there are so many environmental groups out there. There are hundreds, thousands of conservation groups around the world. Why are they all relatively small? Why do so few really achieve escape velocity and become big, right? I mean, CI could have been a tiny little enterprise and remained that way. Mm-hmm. There has to be something quite special about him and what he put together to get this org to grow and not remain relatively small, but actually become one of the big players, all in a very short amount of time, relatively speaking. So I was always attracted by that story, and I also was attracted by what was at the heart of CI, this mission that we are protecting nature for people. Coming from the global south, I love nature, and for me, nature exists for its own right. I'm fine with that. My happy place is being in the wild, in the wilderness. But I understand that if you're in Sierra Leone or Sri Lanka or Colombia, you really have to think about it in a different way, that love alone is not going to be enough. You also have to provide real value for communities, for them to be able to embrace conservation. They have to see that connection between their lives and what they're trying to protect. And if you could do that, if you could create that virtuous link, then you have sustainable conservation that will outlast philanthropy, right? And CI always had that in its DNA. I also liked our exclusive focus on the global south. I love the geographies CI works in, and that attracted me to this organization. So that's what made me jump to CI. And I thought, I want to work with the founder. I want to actually meet the people who started this journey. And the first couple of years were amazing. And then what I realized was that Peter not only had built a great culture in this organization, but he had also really built an amazing board. And so in 2017, he didn't just hand it to me. I had to go through interview processes along with others who interviewed for the job. And it was a pretty high pressure interview. As you know, the board is a pretty incredible board. And, not being intimidated sitting in front of that board, getting questions asked at you over several hours, multiple rounds, that was a really incredible process. But going through that, I knew I wanted this job. I knew I would walk through a brick wall to get this job. Now, since I've been here, I've just built on what he has set up. I think that all the big conservation organizations, to be honest, we all do great work, and for the most part. And a good project at CI is no different than a great project at the Nature Conservancy, is a great project at WWF. A good project is a good project. So what makes this place different? The culture here is unique. It really does feel different. I don't know if it's better or worse. For me, it's a better fit. And I like the notion that this is a faster organization. It's really nimble. We will try things that others may not be willing to try. We don't have a huge membership. We also don't have an endowment, which means we're not beholden to anything particular. So as long as we are, true to our values, we are willing to experiment. We're willing to take an idea in science to market quickly. And I think that spirit of innovation is what really has been something that I felt like we could grow here. Now, in terms of fundraising, the thing that I bring to the table as a CEO. So as a CEO, you need to have at least one superpower. And for me, it's storytelling. I think of everything in terms of story. I think of my life in sort of a narrative arc. And what I have been able to do at CI is lay out a vision, lay out a story that more people are willing to follow and want to be part of that journey that we're on. And that's, I think, what's led us to be successful so far. We could be more successful, I think, but successful in terms of raising private money, but also corporate and government funding as well.
Sanjayan, you mentioned that superpower.
Yeah.
And you're an amazing storyteller. And we all know there's a story to be told and many people to be persuaded on how to mobilize resources and action in favor of conservation. There are two things that worry me. One, that when we look at the wildlife in the planet, in the last 5 decades, we've lost almost 70% of the world's wildlife. And also, when it comes to land deterioration and deforestation, we have lost in a space like the Amazon, the equivalent of France and Germany together in the last 4 decades or so. And if we don't stop those trends, we'll see the Amazon no longer being a contention wall, but instead a net emitter. So when we talk about conservation, we talk about the protection of species and life in the planet. We also talk about protecting these hotspots. What do you think is missing? Why are we as humans performing so badly, and what has to be changed that you believe could be addressed from a public-private perspective?
You're completely right. I mean, if you look at the human experience, people today are better off than people in my parents' generation. And in virtually every index you can think of, from access to healthcare, to democracy, to economic uplift, to empowerment of minorities and women. I mean, you name the index, and my life today and this generation is fundamentally better off than the previous generation. My dad never wants to go camping. And I say, why? And he says, why do I want to go sleep on the ground? I did that my whole life. And as long as, my family's been in Sri Lanka, they slept on the ground until my generation, right? The one place that we haven't done that, the one place where we haven't seen general uplift is in our relationship with nature. And you're right, in my time on Earth, your time on Earth, we've seen these dramatic collapses of mammal species, of wild habitat, etc. And so we certainly can't expect that for my kids. It'll be all gone by the time they have kids. So why is that? So I think I don't think people are stupid. I don't think people are callous. I think that this is a harder question. Let me frame it a little differently, if you don't mind.
No, of course.
I think private philanthropy doesn't take enough risk. It tends to want guaranteed results. So what we do with mostly private philanthropy is do the same thing over and over again and deliver the most plain vanilla solutions you can think of. Because amazingly, when people give money, they still want like a guarantee. I actually think that's why universities do so well. It's because they can guarantee that if you give me 100 million, I'll put up a building and put your name on it. I think it's pretty easy to be able to do that. I think the work we do is super hard, and you need to take lots and lots of risks and try lots of things that are not really going to work that well. And private philanthropy is just not set up right to embrace that. I think governments are really slow. So eventually governments will get onto it, but it takes them a long time to have, it's the beat of democracy. It's the progress. They lurch, right? So it'll be stasis for a long time, and then you'll have one big lurch. And right now in the world, government coffers are pretty dry, or at least the West, or the G20, basically is not really flush with cash. At least that's the posture. Companies do have finances, but they undervalue risk. So when they think about investing in Colombia or investing in Peru. They overblow the risk of losing that capital. So you have three pockets of money, each one not reinforcing the other, but working sometimes in cross purposes. I think if you can get more coherence between these three engines of change, private philanthropy willing to take risks and develop new models they can throw out there, governments that can set the rules up to ensure that risk that is taken by private money is not crazy risk, or de-risk it, right? Lay out the rules of the game and be willing to do that early. And then companies who are willing to then put their balance sheet to work, we will see the kind of progress we need to see on protecting and restoring nature. The good news is that you are seeing some of this happening today. I mean, the most impressive thing that I've seen in my time in conservation has happened in the last 5 years, when I've seen really large amounts of private capital flowing into the protection of and restoration of nature, either because of restoration or blue carbon or some kind of carbon market or water, as in the case of Bogota. That's an incredibly useful signal to have. And it's the one thing that I never thought was possible. It's actually happening right now. We are finally starting to put numbers on the table, financial numbers on the table, that are meeting the challenge, the scale of the problem. But it's still not nearly enough. And it's not nearly enough because government rules are all over the place and the risks aren't being properly accounted for. And philanthropy, does some good, of course, but it's not doing the kinds of things that it really is built to do.
There's something that we have shared in multiple conversations, and is the opportunity to build market-driven, nature-based solutions.
Yeah.
Just to look at the figures, Africa has to invest something close to $2.8 trillion from now towards 2030 in order to meet their national determined contributions of all the African continent nations. Maybe the sum will be something close in the case of Latin America and the Caribbean. And those resources are not going to come from budgetary allocations, are not going to come necessarily from philanthropy, and are going to be more difficult to come from bilateral governmental donors. So I think there's a great opportunity for those kinds of market-driven, nature-based solutions. And there's one issue that has been kind of controversial, and I've been a clear defender of the carbon credits markets, especially the volunteer carbon credit markets. Why? Because it's a way to mobilize resources for projects that are aimed to have energy transition, conservation, and recovery of land, you name it. There's a multiplicity. And in CI, you've been able to create pilot projects that have become a reference model in the world. CI was a pioneer in the carbon credit markets itself, but it's also a pioneer in the blue credits. One project in the Cispatá Bay in Colombia, and you've worked now on debt swaps, you've worked on those kinds of elements. Obviously, now the question is, how can we make those carbon credits full of integrity and more, much better accounting and so on? But what's your take on the need of those market-driven, nature-based solutions? And if I may say, when I look at the carbon credits specifically, I think if they did not exist, we will have to invent it, because they have proven to be a mechanism of massively deploy capital. What's your take on what can be improved in order to generate more confidence and trust in those market-driven, nature-based solutions?
Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is that every climate conference, the world's industrialized nations show up, make pledges, often weak pledges that never come to being. Like the money actually doesn't show up, and we just keep adding more zeros to the pledges. So there's a huge deficit of trust in the global South for the global North to really fund the energy transition and the nature transition the planet desperately needs. So we can sit here and argue about it, or we can add, an actual mechanism that could work. It's not going to solve all of it. And for me, the voluntary carbon markets for high integrity carbon is a necessary piece of the puzzle. You have to have it deployed. Now, I think the reason why you get pushback is twofold. One is, people worry that if you do this, you're giving permission for emitters to continue to emit. And I think that's a very short-sighted way of thinking about it. Think about how easy it is for us in this country to get on a plane and fly to another state or to fly to another country. If you're in Africa, you want to be able to do exactly that. And I get it. I absolutely understand why you'd want to do that. So this idea that countries in the global south aren't going to want to emulate a better quality of life is just a fantasy, right? The only way forward is forward. And they're going to be wanting some of the things that we completely take for granted. So there's no way we're going to be able to deprive communities or countries of doing that. In which case, we better think about all the ways in which we can mitigate some of that action. And for me, protecting and restoring nature gives you some of the best ROI in terms of capturing and sequestering, carbon. Now, the other reason why this has taken a hit is because there's been bad actors. Like with any speculative market, bad actors have flooded into the market, and some of them are absolutely shams. And they should absolutely not exist there. We at Conservation International have been very careful to go after very high quality, high integrity, verified carbon, and we feel good standing behind those projects, as well as those who buy from us have wanted that to happen. But I think that one of the things that we have not felt has sufficiently been displayed is action by governments to clarify the rules. So I think in the United States, for example, we've sat on the sidelines for quite a long time. And I think being able to step in and clarify the rules by which high integrity carbon ought to be made available in the market will massively transform the marketplace and will help, fund the conservation and protection and restoration of nature and the capturing of carbon, both of which are desperately needed for the planet. There's a lot of people who just say, look, we're just going to build a carbon sucking machine one day, and we're going to one day get it it wouldn't be cost prohibitive, and that's going to solve the problem. And I have no doubt that there's some truth to that. We are going to come up with carbon capture machines that could probably operate at a reasonable, cost-effective way. However, while we wait for that, why shouldn't we also invest in nature-based solutions? Because at minimum, they're going to make it better, right? They're going to make whatever end goal you end up with, they're going to make it better. And unlike a machine that you could build, building half a machine doesn't get you any carbon. Getting half a forest still gets you carbon. I mean, the thing about nature-based solutions is you don't have to get it perfectly right. Even an imperfect project is still delivering net benefits for people, for nature, and for carbon.
Sanjayan, market-driven nature-based solutions is a very important topic today. Also, governmental commitment is very important. You have seen that in this year, 2024, we had COP16 in Cali on biodiversity. We just had COP16 in Riyadh on desertification. We had COP29 in Baku. But there's a great expectation for COP30 on climate next year in Brazil, in Belém do Pará. And there's going to be a great debate about how resources should be allocated. There's going to be a debate about what's going to happen with the Paris Agreement, especially on Scope 3, Article 6, and this very technical conversations that we that live in this environment regularly have. But my question is for that regular citizen that is listening to us, that is thrilled from your experiences, that is very emotional and also admired by the work of an organization like CI, what can we tell that person should be the best possible outcome of COP30, specifically with the understanding that there are good COPs and bad COPs, COPs that have a lot of speeches, not much resources, COPs that have a lot of pledges, not too much disbursements, and COPs that can really change some of the fundamental agreements in order to reach more success. Are you optimistic? Are you less optimistic? But beyond that, what do you think will be the greatest possible outcome from Belén to Pará?
I mean, I don't think framing it as being an optimist or pessimist is the right way to do it. I think that these COPs are incredibly important. I know that for most people around the world, but even people like you and I who are deeply immersed in it, it can be really frustrating. And one can wonder the value about why you need to get people together to talk and talk and talk and talk, and you know, to end up with disappointing news or not have agreements at the end. But these institutions are really, really important. I think politicians do get a bit of a bad rap, right? I don't think it's easy to do this. I mean, you know, trying to represent the sovereign interests of a nation and then make it fit within a global framework. Just doing it bilaterally can take years. Bilateral trade agreements between two countries can take years and years and years. And if you're thinking that it takes years, imagine getting 190 plus countries together to agree upon anything. I mean, the most amazing thing about these climate COPs and even the biodiversity COP is that we have got, for the most part, general agreement over with countries who are sworn enemies of one another. I mean, when we were in Montreal, we had DRC and Rwanda agreeing. We had China and the United States. We even had Russia and Ukraine. Like, that's not easy to do. So, you know, I would ask the general public, don't be patient. It's okay. You should demand action. But also have some understanding that these things are hard. And there is no other replacement institution. We still have to work through these institutions. And the fact that the world is finding some level of common ground where they cannot find common ground on anything, on religion, on economics, on national interests, on race, but yet we're finding common ground about nature and the need to protect our planet is a remarkable human achievement. Remarkable. It's as remarkable as the pyramids. I mean, it's as remarkable as that. So, number one, have faith in these institutions. Yes, demand more from your politicians, demand action, but also understand that these are hard problems. For Belém in particular, here's what I would love to see. I would love to see real commitment to decarbonizing, you know, the world. So this whole debate about whether oil and gas should be in or out, whether we should mention it, you know, I thought we had crossed the Rubicon, so to speak, in the UAE. And I think we need to absolutely put a marker for oil and gas. There is no way for the future of the planet except to understand that we are going to have to transition out of fossil fuels. And it's either going to happen soon or it's going to happen slowly, but one way or another it's going to happen, so we might as well put the milestone markers down now. The second is, this is going to be a nature COP. So let's clarify the rules about investing in nature at scale. And let's really put the spotlight on nature, because that's a relatively uncontroversial part of the COP. There is more common agreement between Republicans and Democrats, between East and West, between North and South, that nature needs to be protected and restored. 3, indigenous peoples. So there are lots of local communities and indigenous peoples whose voices need to be heard and whose stewardship of the land needs to be acknowledged and embraced. And I think that's going to be at the forefront of those COPs. If these 3 things can come together at this thing, what I don't want to do is another new commitment of some big number that there's no plan to meet, right? I want commitments that we can meet and milestones that we can actually get to. And I will take a smaller number if I'm more certain that we can make progress than a bigger number that just seems so distant and so impossible that no one even attempts to get there. I think if we can get these done, I think we will have a very, very productive COP. But then we have to do the next one. So it should be COP 31 and so on. I mean, you know, it's a remarkable thing, don't you agree? I mean, that
yes. I mean, even though sometimes you might get lost into more discussions than practical effects, I just believe it's great to see the commitment from heads of state and private sector all together trying to address climate action. And I do agree with you. People don't have to be patient, but I also believe there has been tremendous progress. But let me now ask some difficult questions. CI has done hundreds, if not thousands, of projects in its existence. But if you were to pick some of those projects, 2 or 3, that are in the top of your mind today that you would use for a storytelling event about the work that CI is doing today, which ones would you pick?
I was just in South Africa, and I talked to our head of HR for South Africa, and she told me about going to a poor rural community and meeting some of the young people from that community. And she said to me, of the 5 young people that she met, 3 of them said that they had contemplated suicide over the last year because they saw no hope for the future. They were sort of stuck. This is a province that has 80% plus unemployment rate. So, like, no path forward. She said she went back 6 months later and it had completely transformed. And the difference was that CI was now operating a program there called Jobs for Nature in South Africa. And this is a program that helps communities basically transform their practices of grazing or raising cattle or raising sheep on the land. And for changing practices, they get access to markets. So we help them access markets if they change practices to be more biodiversity friendly, more carbon friendly, more predator friendly. That's why we do it. But the real impact on these kids was dramatic. I mean, she was talking about people who had never had a formal paycheck in their entire lives. These are 17 to 25-year-olds who had never had a paycheck, and now they have one. And the fact that they have now a pathway out of poverty, so kids who graduate from the program are 3 times more likely to get a job in the future, right? So there's real data now that show it. To me, that's an amazing thing, that we're linking someone's economic empowerment, someone's mobility, someone's job, someone's reason to live, to protecting and restoring nature. That's a beautiful story for me. If you go to Brazil, we're working with BTG Pactual, a big investment bank, to restore degraded land in the Cerrado. The Cerrado is even more precious than the Amazon. There's very little of it left. It's sort of a dry forest. And what we're doing is taking very degraded land that is now currently used for cattle ranching with all invasive grasses. We're restoring half of it for native forests that's going to be left alone forever, and the other half is going into timber production. Now, between the two, you can make an investable product here. And BTG Pactual has been able to amass funding from the likes of Microsoft and Meta and the US government and the British government and others, investors, who have invested in this product to restore nature. The reason I love this is because I am not having to do the heavy work of knocking on doors and asking for money to restore the Cerrado. This is the private sector doing it, not because they love the Cerrado, it's nice if they do, doing it because they think they're going to make money on it. I mean, what better sort of, you and I believe that nature has real value. So what better way of demonstrating that than something like this? And then in Colombia, we did the first blue carbon project. That's a cutting edge thing, to go underwater and to estimate how much carbon is sequestered in the mud below these mangroves that should never be cut, then quantify that and then be able to put them for sale on the open market, get an incredible buyer like Apple, for example, to come in and take those credits as a way of funding mangrove conservation and restoration around the world. Just jaw-dropping. In Indonesia, we're doing this incredible project with a debt for nature swap, which we are hopefully trying to get done by the end of January. This is a debt that the country owns, that the US government, through a program we have here, is able to take some of that debt and swap it out. And that money now will go towards protecting the most biodiverse place on the planet, the Bird's Head Seascape of Indonesia. CI is an instrumental part of that swap. So these are all projects that, honestly, when I was in grad school, I thought I was out there trying to save nature. I thought I'd be working on, collaring an elephant or, following a grizzly bear. That's what I thought we would be doing. What I realized what we're doing is transforming the way people think about the economy, because think about their lives, thinking about their jobs. I mean, it's a far more integrated, interesting, dynamic program that we have today.
We're getting close to the end of this conversation, and definitely we could last years talking about the things that we love of nature. but I'm going to switch more of a Proust test kind of difficult question. So you've traveled to many places in the planet. You love the outdoors. You love to fish. You love to go to Montana now and then. You're also a scuba diver. But if you were to pick one spot that's always in your heart that you say, this is the place where I love to go there and, disconnect, have this interaction with nature. And yeah, I know it's going to be definitely more than one, but if you can describe at least one or two places that are always in your heart and mind that you would say, when I think about conservation, this place has come immediately to my head. Which ones would you pick?
It'd probably be Africa, and particularly East Africa. Humans evolved in that landscape. So 99.9% of our genes, your genes and my genes and everyone in the planet, is perfectly tuned for that environment, the Rift Valley of East Africa. Somewhere from southern Ethiopia, maybe all the way down to sort of Malawi, right? So right through Kenya, right through Tanzania, right down into Malawi. That part of the world, it's like 75 degrees, sunny. It's open savannas with umbrella-shaped trees. Sort of looks like a golf course, right? There's something about that landscape that speaks to me and speaks to everyone. Even if you've never been to the Rift Valley or to the Masai Mara or the East Africa, if you go there, you will always want to come back. It's like something bites you and that brings you back over and over again. And I've thought about this, and I actually think it's like cellular memory, right? So our genes are perfectly tuned for that place. And all the things that make you and I different, your hair color, skin color, all of that, that's just all in the last, say, 50,000 years. But 4 million years of perfection happened in this place. This is what made humans human. Of course, this is the place. Like, even if you've never been there, it's like coming home. So for me, East Africa is a very special sort of resonance for me. I love the oceans. I love the freedom the oceans have. And, America has given me so much. My whole career has been supercharged because of what this country has given me. And Montana has some places that are really wild and really big. And I do love that as well. I tell you what I'm not a big forest guy. And this must pain you to hear this because you come from this amazing forest country. But I find forest claustrophobic. And
sometimes could be.
Yes. You know what I'm saying? Like, you need a lot of interpretation to be able to accept a forest. But this open savanna or the deserts or those open spaces, just are easier to interpret as a human.
Sanjayan, do you have a favorite animal?
I like owls. I think I like owls because they're sort of cryptic. They're around at night. They're solitary, a bit like me. I think they're introverts. I think they're smart, but they're also pretty cool predators. I don't particularly have a favorite animal, but I like owls.
And I've
seen owls in Colombia. I've seen owls in Africa.
I haven't found that many. I mean, I've seen some. But my wife is an expert, and when we go to different places, like I don't know what's with the owls, but sometimes she finds them easier than I regularly do, and it's a species that it's also very interesting. I was actually in Cornell University, and we went to see a lot of the research that they're doing on birds, and also how they're putting together this library of bird sounds so that they can be identified through technology, and it's pretty amazing. Yes. But let me ask you something. You're a great reader. You're an academic as well. You're a scientist. You love to read. Is there any particular book that has changed or helped you change perspectives or motivates you in the area of conservation that you would recommend to many of the people that are listening to us, that they could buy and have close and maybe have it as a reference book?
I'm not the right person to ask this question. And you know why? I don't tend to read a lot of books in our space because I find them depressing. And because I'm all, like this is my work, right? And my life. And I'm thinking about this all the time. So when I read, I go for escapism. Okay. I go for science fiction. I go for fantasy. I go for spy novels. I read a lot of biographies. So there's a really interesting book that's a few years out, but I read it right as COVID hit. And it's called The Splendid and the Vile.
Oh.
And it's about Churchill.
Yeah,
Larson's book. It's a great book to read. And the reason why I think it's a great book to read is because you really get the sense of the decisions that a leader had to make with very imperfect conditions, and the ability to sort of steer a country through this incredible peril in some ways has a meaning to me at this moment in time, politically, economically, certainly biogeographically, right? Or geologically, right? So when you think about climate change, you can sort of use it as a way of thinking through. So I tend to read books not in my field as a way of understanding conservation a bit better. But obviously, there are many, many great books out there. One of the old ones that I think is still worth reading is Song of the Dodo, that Quammen wrote 25 years ago. I think it's still worth reading. I think Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, is still worth reading. And I think some of those early books really set the tone for what's there now. The problem with the books today are they're so, they're so honest about what's facing the planet that you quickly end up in a place of quiet desperation.
I had Jane Goodall
Yeah.
in our podcast some months ago.
Amazing.
And we talked about...
Her book, Reasons for Hope.
Yes.
By the way,
it's beautiful.
That's a great book.
But we spoke about when she was a young girl and she had this toy, this chimpanzee that she received for the first time, and how this changed her life forever. And I asked about what would she say to that girl if she had it in front of her. And I'm going to ask you the same question now. Sanjayan, successful CEO of Conservation International, what would you tell that kid who was in West Africa, living in this elevated house, looking at this landscape? If you had the possibility of having some minutes with him, what would you tell him?
This is a good one. I have this amazing ability not to spend a lot of time dwelling about the past. My brain doesn't fill with the worries of the past. They tend to fill with the worries of the future. So what I would tell my younger self is study harder. I wish I was a better student in some classes, because I would kill to have the opportunity now to go back and learn those things. I just don't have the time anymore. So my life's worked out great. I was never worried about it when I was a kid. I never spent a lot of time. I always found a way of bouncing back or navigating through all the challenges the world threw at me. So I was good at that. I'd say worry a little less, but I would say study harder.
And is there a phrase, a quote, a principle, a value that you carry with you every day, that you would love to share with your family, with your kids, with whoever you had this conversation as maybe as a legacy? That
I thought you were going to ask me what I would have studied harder.
Oh, well, I could, yeah, but that would
it would have been economics.
Yes.
It would have been business.
Yes.
I would have taken a finance class, and I would have studied harder in statistics. I took lots of stats classes, but statistics are so weird for the human brain. We only discovered the mean after we discovered algebra and geometry and calculus. So the notion of stats is a very new notion for humans. And it's super important for us. So what phrase? So CI has a motto.
Or a principle or
but
value.
look, I think CI's motto is actually quite good. We talk about the head in the sky and the feet in the mud. And I really like that. I like lofty thoughts and I like intellectual debates, but I really want practical application. I don't want to live in the fantasy of what could be. I want to live in the reality of what is. And I think that this organization and its motto marries those two. I always tell my team speed and scale. So I'm not interested in doing something if we don't do it fast and at scale. I really always push for that. So those are two things that I really embrace and I try to live by. Get used to saying sorry. That's a good one. I tell people, because you get things, it's hard to be opinionated and focused without also getting things wrong. And I get things wrong all the time, probably on a daily basis. And so being comfortable with saying sorry is something great to have.
Sanjayan, it has been a pleasure to have you in Tres Respuestas. I look forward to see you in Colombia again soon. And thank you for this amazing work that you're doing for the planet, for conservation, and for being such an incredible person.
My pleasure, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.